Thank you very much, Anam, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me on this panel. Before I answer your question, I would just like to give the audience an introduction to AIIB, which is the bank that I work for currently. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is the latest multilateral development bank in the global community. It's been around for 10 years now, and as the name suggests, it basically is in the business of financing investment projects in Asia, but now increasingly also in other parts of the world. Pakistan was the first country that AIIB invested in 10 years ago and is among the top 10 recipients of AIIB lending. It's a very unique institution in that it is led by countries of the global south. They are the majority shareholders, and they also happen to be the countries that receive the most funding. No other multilateral development bank is like that. It's based in Beijing, and it has 110 countries that are members now. In terms of your question, I think there are 4 points that I'd like to make. The first point is that macroeconomic risks, the perception that developing countries are subject to a lot of fiscal risks, macroeconomic vulnerabilities, makes it very difficult for these countries to access climate finance. The second point is that without these countries mobilizing climate finance both domestically and externally, we will never be able to tackle the global climate change challenge. So we're in a bit of a conundrum. We don't have enough financing flowing to emerging markets and developing economies, and yet the global fight against climate change cannot be won without these countries being brought on board. My third point is that one of the reasons why these countries don't get financing is because the markets tend to over-exaggerate the risks in these countries. Markets are notorious for having a sort of herd mentality, particularly when there are risk-off episodes. There's a lot of capital that leaves emerging markets and developing economies, and that's an unfortunate feature of markets that we have to try to resolve. And my fourth point is that actually, as the minister was saying in his keynote address, unfortunately, it is the case that for countries like Pakistan to be able to mobilize the kind of financing that we need, we cannot rely totally on external financing. In fact, the World Bank estimates that about 2/3 of financing for climate needs will need to come from emerging and developing economies themselves. So while there's about 1/3 that we can try to tap externally through institutions like mine, through private capital markets, we will have to be much more nimble at raising our own resources and mobilizing our own domestic savings to be able to meet the climate challenge. So let me now unpack this a little bit in the time that I have. At the AIIB, as I said, our primary business is to fund infrastructure investment projects across Asia, including in Pakistan. So if there's a solar project, if there's a hydro project, if there's a road project, if there's a sanitation project, those are the kind of things that AIIB will finance. But increasingly, in the last 2 years, we have added a new instrument to our toolkit, which is called policy-based financing. This is basically budget support to countries like Pakistan that need financing without a project being identified. But in return, the country has to commit to doing some reforms that will then catalyze private financing to come into climate space. We've done 8 of these already across the world. We have lent to Brazil, we have lent to Rwanda, we have lent to Bangladesh, we have lent to Indonesia. And the good thing about an approach like that is that you're fixing the macroeconomic environment. You're asking the country to undertake reforms like green budgeting, a careful phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies, private capital market development, deepening the investor base. Those are the kinds of reforms that countries have to undertake in order to be able to access this budget support from the AIIB. And I'm very hopeful that Pakistan could also be a country that could tap this new instrument that we have. So that's on your first question. What are the kind of opportunities that come from climate policy-based financing of the kind that AIIB is now offering? In terms of the broader landscape for climate finance and what needs to happen, I think there are 2 or 3 points that I'd like to make there. One is, as I was saying, that there does tend to be an overreaction from markets to macroeconomic instability in countries. There tends to be a over-amplification of a reaction to a particular shock that a country might go through. And in particular, this is created by credit rating agencies. If we can fix the way that credit rating agencies think about climate resilience, climate shocks, to be able to give space to countries like Pakistan, to be able to undertake some climate investment that will improve its medium-term growth outlook, I think instead of panicking about the immediate fiscal stress that that puts on the country, if you take a bit of a longer view, and we can all work together to try to convince credit rating agencies to do that, I think that would be one major change in the global financial architecture that is really needed. The second, I will say, is that more multilateral development banks, like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, need to recommit to the climate agenda. We heard this morning from Minister Sherry Rahman that there's a global retreat from the climate agenda happening, and we all know why that is. Unfortunately, some shareholders of these big multilateral development banks have decided to de-emphasize climate. Fortunately, that's not happening at AIIB. More than 50% of our financing goes towards climate resilient infrastructure. And I would just hope that other MDBs can also return to this agenda sooner rather than later, because the world does need concessional financing in addition to whatever resources that countries can muster themselves. And my final point is that we do need to focus more on domestic resource mobilization. This is not a fight that external financing flows are going to be able to resolve on their own. And to do that, we do need to get our house in order as well. As Minister Aurangzeb was saying, we do need to undertake reforms to build fiscal buffers in Pakistan. We need to bring the level of macroeconomic stress down. Every 2 or 3 years, we have a crisis in Pakistan. Our reserve situation is not very good. So we need to be able to get out of this cycle of dependence on external aid. Because unfortunately, as I said, the reality is that 50%, more than 50% of your climate needs will have to be generated domestically, not just in Pakistan, but across the emerging markets. Thank you.